Hi Palmer, this is David. I hope it's okay if I answer via video. It's easier for me, and this way I can give full answers as opposed to trying to type everything out. I'd probably shortchange you. And you do ask a lot of questions, and so this way I can sort of answer. And this is the first time I've really read them, so this is my earnest, honest reaction to those questions. Please talk a bit about the early stages of Spot Us, coming up with your original idea, composing your business model, writing the grant for the Knight Foundation, etc. Um, Sure. I mean, that's a long sort of thing, and it's hard to sort of give a quick rundown of it. But, um, you know, at the time, I was working for a guy named Jay Rosen, who's a journalism professor at NYU, and I'd been working with him on distributed reporting. You can call it citizen journalism if you want, but this idea of can we distribute the workload of reporting, right? If 50 people do 1 hour of reporting each, does that equate to 50 hours worth of reporting? And I was also the research assistant for a guy named Jeff Howe, who coined the phrase crowdsourcing. So I was basically helping him with his book. Um, and I started researching things like Kiva.org, which is micro lending to people in third world countries to start businesses. And I'm a big believer in distributed reporting, but I also believe that it works for certain types of reporting. And I started realizing that it doesn't work for other types of reporting. And in those instances where you really need one or two people, a small group of people to do the 50 hours, you're creating a financial burden because it takes them 50 hours or more to do that story or whatever. And so the next question was as well, if we can't distribute the work burden, can we distribute the financial burden? So that was the idea. I sort of started talking about it with some friends and different things like that. I pitched it tonight, and obviously went ahead, coming up with the original idea, composing. I mean, in truth, composing a business model. If I'm honest, I was 24, maybe I didn't really know 100% what I was doing. It was more about talking to different people, getting as much advice as possible. But I think also at the time you have to put yourself in late 2007. Um, it was more about even just what could this even work, right? Like, what does this even look like? This is before Kickstarter, so I think people didn't really know what crowdfunding could look like on a platform. There had been examples of crowdfunding, but they were isolated, and I don't think they were even mainstream. And so what Spot Us was really about was like trying to say, can we make a platform that does this on a regular basis? What does that look like? And the business model sort of obviously was important and came out and was more about budgeting and trying to think about, well, how much money can we take off the top and things like that. And I think I see there's like 20 questions, so let me just keep going. In hindsight, if you go back and change elements of any of these early stage pieces, what would you do differently? Is there any advice current day David would dispense to 2008 David? Not really. I mean, in truth, I really, I mean, I don't want to say like, I did nothing wrong because it's not about that. It's just, I don't know if we could have done anything differently than, it's really easy now to say like, oh, shouldn't have, it could have been, not just journalism. It could have been, anything, right? You fund anything, a platform to fund anything, or creative projects, right? And it's also really easy to say, um, I think if anything, maybe we wouldn't have done the same focus on local. We started, all the investigations were really local, and maybe I would have gone a little bit more broader because I think those had more appeal, right? You go really local, you have a smaller group of people are interested in funding it. One could argue that any kind of journalism has a tinge of activism. Okay. But what do you say to people who think that crowd-funded journalism opens up a Pandora's box of ethics questions or concerns about conflict of interest? Actually, the first part of your question kind of answers it. Well, what do people say if they say crowdfunding opens up a Pandora's box of ethical questions? Does that mean that other journalism does not have ethical questions? The questions around crowdfunding are questions about money and influence in journalism, and money is involved in journalism. You could ask, there are ethical questions when there's regular advertising that supports journalism. The way I would say it is, you're absolutely right. Money is not clean. There's no such thing as clean money. But that is not, the result of crowdfunding. It's just more apparent in crowdfunding. It's more in your face. But those ethical questions exist whenever money and journalism are related, and they have been for the last, 100 and something years in sort of modern journalistic age. So there really are, I think there are ways where if one person, funds, crowdfunds, it's not really crowdfunding, really, that's like, just pay to play. And again, that's just sort of a question that has always existed, right? What if Bloomberg, bought, I don't know, Newsday or New York Times or something, right? That brings up ethical questions. What if 150 Brownbergs, right, who are not as rich as Bloomberg, chip in $100 each? Does that have ethical questions? Certainly, but it's really no different. In fact, I would say it's kind of ethically cleaner because it's more transparent, and there's less control by any individual. But anyways, so in truth, I never really those questions don't really resonate to me. I was always trying to look and be aware of any ethical conflicts, but I really didn't see any that were like, I didn't see any that were, tried and true as a result of crowdfunding. This, is brand new, would never have happened otherwise. From your experience, have you seen any patterns on what projects get funding versus what projects don't get funding? What are some common characteristics of fully funded work, such as large social network, human interest, always good marketing, etc.? In truth, it's all those things. There is no silver bullet. There's no one thing I could say, oh, if you just do this, it'll get funded, I think it actually came down to the people more than anything else, the reporters behind it, and what their story was, that they wanted to do, how well they pitched it, how well they pushed it, marketed it, etc. Yeah, I don't think there was anything other than elbow grease that really made the difference. That made the difference all the time was really, people that just put it up and walked away, had no success, and people that, did it. How did SpotUs charge contributors? Was it similar to Kickstarter's method where people get charged and what's project? No, it was a little bit different. So we would charge contributors 10% extra at the point of donation. So if somebody donated $20, the donation page would say $22, and it would be transparent. So $20 is going to the story, $2 is going to SpotUs, and that charge happened immediately. And then on the story page, what was being fundraised, it would show $20 come in. It would not show the extra $2 that went to us, but that $20 was all theirs. We did not then take another 10%. We only took 10% at the point of donation. And if the story did not get fully funded, it would be up to the reporter to decide whether or not they wanted to go ahead and do the story similar to Indiegogo in that respect. What was the success rate of SpotUs? How many projects were fully funded versus not fully funded? I honestly don't know. This is a total, I'd say between 20 and 30%. I know that that's a wide margin, and I honestly don't know anymore. I've been out of SpotUs now for a year and a half, maybe 2 years. Is that? I'd probably closer to a year and a half. But I don't know. I'm sorry. How many traditional media outlets publish the work funded on SpotUs? Actually, I think this I can find out. If you go to spot.us right now, and always, we had a sort of list of media partners. I hope it's still up. And I think it was something like over, I know it was over 100. For some reason, my internet is not going. It's probably because I'm recording this right now. 110 publishing partners. So if you go to spot.us where it says 110 publishing partners, you can click into that and you'll see the full list and some hyperlinks. I think that's the full list, at least. You've said and written on your blog that crowdfunding journalism isn't a new idea or even your idea, correct? Why do you think you were the first person to combine all the necessary elements of the idea and the mechanics into a workable platform? Again, crowdfunding journalism, to my knowledge, one of the first examples, or the first example of it, was a guy named Chris Albritton, I think was his name. And he did a story, it was called Back to Iraq, 2004, I think. And he basically funded his trip from his readers on his blog to go back to Iraq. This is during the second Iraq Gulf War. That was 2004. To my knowledge, that was the first crowdfunding journalism. And again, that was a one-off. That was like an individual and an audience, right? Kind of like what Andrew Sullivan did. Less big, right? But same idea. And then there had been lots of sort of crowdfunding I'd seen. Nonprofits would, I mean, look, crowdfunding is just, every church does it every Sunday, right? Every nonprofit has always done it. It's just sort of, it's a very natural concept. It's just, there hadn't been a platform put online to really do it on a regular basis in a sort of systematic way. Certainly not for journalism, but there was Kiva, right? There was Donors Choose. There was something called Cellaband. Cellaband in the UK was actually kind of influential. So it's closed. It shut down a long time ago. But Cellaband um, was basically Kickstarter. Bands would go on and say, but it was just for bands, and they'd say we want to raise money for our next album and blah blah blah. And that was maybe 2006 and 7 ish. And so basically, I looked at all those platforms and I said, well, what does this look like for journalism, right? What does Cellaband look like for journalism? Where am I? How did you measure success at Spot Us? Mostly in ways that how much was funded, how many stories got funded, and then of course there was the impact of those stories, which I'd always sort of follow up, and it was really great to see stories that either won awards or really had the sort of journalistic impact that you want, where somebody gets fired or something like that. I mean that in an accountability way, of course. So yeah, I mean it was sort of both the numerical, how many stories are going through and how much is being raised, and also the sort of more journalistic, squishy impact. Spot Us was bought by American Public Media. I wouldn't say bought; it was acquired. Small distinction, because Spot Us was a nonprofit, it became part of American Public Media, also a nonprofit. But there was no, I didn't collect money on it. And Matter was acquired by Medium. We are seeing examples of crowdfunding journalism sites getting scooped up by larger media organizations. How does this change the site's original structure and maybe even their appeal? You also said that not a lot has happened on Spot Us since you left. Why is that? I can't answer why a lot has not happened on Spot Us since I left. And Matter and Spot Us are two very different beasts. Spot Us is a platform. Matter is like they were basically a content company, right? They were making science stories, and Medium is in the business of producing these sort of long narrative, New Yorker-esque kind of stories. So it makes sense that they basically acquired the folks at Matter to produce content. There might be something, they're letting Matter sort of stay separate, is my understanding, but they may find ways to roll it in and use it to test things. But Spot Us as a platform could be used to fund Matter. I mean, Matter was basically a project of Kickstarter. Matter could have been a project of Spot Us, right? So them being acquired is kind of different. That's like if a publication would be acquired versus a technology. Mergers and acquisitions are all very different. It all depends. You can ask what's going to happen at Tumblr, what's going to happen at Instagram, etc. But I can't really answer what's going on with Spot Us right now. As crowdfunding, your next question, as crowdfunding sites continue to gain notoriety, Zach Braff using Kickstarter for a movie project, Gawker using Indiegogo to buy a video for a story, etc. What do you see as the future for these types of platforms? If you look at my last blog post, actually, at digidave.org, blog.digidave.org, it's a little bit of a rant, and it's only up there right now. I mean, as new blog posts go up, it'll go down, but it's a little bit of a rant on crowdfunding, and I mentioned sort of, the Gawker thing. I actually think there's a question about ownership here. Who owns the platforms by which people crowdfund is a really interesting question to me. Is it good for journalism that Kickstarter and Indiegogo essentially will, or at least do right now, account for? I'm making this up, obviously, but let's just say 90% of the crowdfunding journalism campaigns. Is that a good thing or not? I don't know. But that's the questions that I'm interested in. I won't try and proclaim what is the future of it, but that's what interests me. If you were a freelance journalist trying to get a project off the ground, what would be your first steps? What platforms would you turn to? I don't know. I kind of almost don't know how to start to answer that question, just because of where my mindset is. I would use you know, again, what I talked about a little bit with the last question, if I wanted to sort of like be completely independent, I would just do it on my own, right? Why do I need a platform? You need a platform to get audience. And then the question is it healthy that Kickstarter and Indiegogo then become the place where journalism or journalists need to go to get an audience to fund their projects? I don't know. Anything else you'd like to add? Is there a big question I'm missing? Who else should I talk to? Not off the top of my head, but if anything comes to mind, I will let you know. Hope all is well, and feel free to send any more questions my way.